This tutorial is looking at the poem First Flight from your anthology. Let's think about the context first of all. So this is the first collection of poetry by U.A. Fanthorpe, who lived between 1929 and 2009, and it's published in 1978 when she was almost 50. So basically she stopped teaching English and took up a post as a receptionist in a psychiatric hospital. Her poems range from light verse, although they do often have a more serious side, to poems dealing with historical events and social change, and her love of all things British, the Cotswolds, the Women's Institute and country churches. During her lifetime, she witnessed the development of international commercial flights and holidays abroad. And this is what this poem focuses on. So you've got a novice passenger, someone who's flying for the first time, and the impact that that can have on somebody. That voice within the poem of the persona is definitely juxtaposed against some more kind of affluent voices who are experienced flyers, and therefore you can also think about kind of Thatcherite Britain in the 1980s and the kind of rise of materialism. Okay, let's have a little look at the poem then. So in terms of the form, it's written in free verse. There's a lack of fixed form, and that really suits the switching of voices as they cut across each other's thoughts on the plane. It's supposed to create that, I suppose, like cacophony of voices where there are lots of different people on the aeroplane and we can hear their thoughts. So let's look at this opening couple of stanzas then. Plane moves, I don't like the feel of it. In a car I'd suspect low tyre pressure. A sudden swiftness, earth slithers, off at an angle. The experience solidly read Guardian. In between that, obviously, we get another voice that comes in here. So as you can see, and there's a very fearful voice at the beginning of the poem. Plane moves. We've got a very short sentence with the caesura afterwards, and that makes it feel quite abrupt and jarring. It's quite uncomfortable. It's definitely stilted because not only is caesura, but that line is end stopped as well. Okay, and that definitely shows us their discomfort. This analogy, in a car I'd suspect low tyre pressure, shows how sort of uncomfortable she's feeling, and it's also quite a precise analogy which creates this idea of a kind of thoughtful voice that's obviously got sort of high levels of emotional intelligence as they at time. And then, so obviously this is the plane starting to move along the runway, and in the second stanza it's starting to take off. So we get all of this sibilance, a sudden swiftness, earth slithers. Okay, and that gives quite a strong kind of hissing noise. It's definitely uncomfortable, and also brings our attention to this verb slithers, okay, which is followed by the enjambment. And I think the focus on this word reinforces that sense of something being kind of uncomfortable and unnatural as well. You know, the earth can't slither, so that's something that is trying to demonstrate that uncontrolled motion, that feeling that happens as the plane starts to take off. The enjambment as well literally creates the effect of takeoff, that sort of uncomfortable, you know, when your sort of stomach jumps slightly as the plane starts to take off, and that's what I think the enjambment's trying to recreate there. We get further caesura here, don't we? Linked into the idea that it's taking off at an angle, something which again is kind of uncomfortable and disconcerting. And then this speaker's feelings are contrast with the experienced flyers who we then get to hear from too. So in contrast to this sort of slithery feeling that this persona's experience, we get the adverb solidly to describe the experienced flyers, okay? And what that does is it really contrasts with this idea of the slippery motion of the plane to show us that, you know, the experienced flyers are very nonchalant. They just don't need to worry about this. They're totally used to these sort of weird sensations that, you know, we all get used to when we're flying. But as we talked about in class, right, when you see children who are flying for the first time, they're definitely disconcerted by this. Okay. In between this, which notice has got the enjambment again, okay, so that kind of builds a bit of suspense and tension as we find out what they're doing, okay, and then in between that enjambment, actually their voice intersects the voice of the persona, saying, this is a rather short hop for me, okay. Real juxtaposition, isn't there, between this experienced flyer and the new flyer, okay. They're very calm, they're minimizing it, it's just a short hop, okay, and it's a definite juxtaposition. They are reading Guardians, discuss secretaries, business lunches. Okay, so here we've got this list of things that the experienced people are doing in this listing sentence, which has got more caesura in it, but in a slightly different way because it's a comma rather than a full stop. And what becomes evident here is that these are business people. Check this is still recording. Yeah, it is. Okay, and then we get another caesura here. Okay, so that sort of fragmented feel continues all the way through. And here, I think it's creating a break between these solid experienced flyers and this sort of novice flyer who says, I crane for the last of dear familiar England. Okay, so this verb crane is really creating a sense of longing, isn't it? They're desperate to get that last look of dear England, and there's that sense with these pre-modifiers, these adjectives dear and familiar, really creating a sense of safety around the idea of being in England. Now we know that Fanthorpe loved England, so that kind of fits in with that. Okay, and so I think the caesura there is creating that break between those two experiences. And again, we've got that enjambment to build a bit of suspense. We don't know what she's craning for, but I think it also creates a sense of kind of separation, because this is the moment at which she's leaving dear England and entering into a completely new experience. And then we get this very indifferent voice that intersects again. I'm doing it just to say I've done it. There's a kind of air of arrogance to that as well, isn't there? And that really juxtaposes this listing sentence, which comes through here: familiar England, motorways, reservoirs, building sites. Now, motorways are not something that we would think of as being particularly endearing about England. And so I think what that noun does is it shows you that it's the safety, the familiarity that she's yearning for rather than the beauty of it, because the other one, the thing that gets referenced is building sites. Okay, and then there's another caesura, the shift from all the kind of fear and anxiety that we've had so far, and now that they're up in the air, she starts to really acknowledge the beauty of the experience. So I'm just going to shift the poem down, and then we'll have a look at the next section. So then we get this metaphor of the sun as like a nimble tiny disc. Okay, so the fact that we're coming into this more kind of literary tone with imagery in it definitely starts to reflect the changing experience of the persona. So the sun runs up the porthole and vanishes. So this verb choice vanishes is really suggesting now that this has become a magical, although it's scary, there's still that kind of anxiety there. It's becoming a magical experience as the persona looks out of the window and observes the world around them from a completely different perspective. So we can definitely say there's a kind of beauty and awe that's being acknowledged here, and you can see I've put that next to the side of this next stanza that sort of runs through this next couple of stanzas here. Again, it's juxtaposed by tell us when we get to water. Okay, so again, that sense of just kind of being indifferent, but also the imperative. So we talked about the context of kind of Thatcherite Britain, and these more affluent people are not maybe treated particularly sympathetically. They seem quite detached and later on quite arrogant. And then we get another metaphor under the broad meringue kingdom. Okay, so this section here, along with of cumulus bearing the crinkled tangerine stain that light spreads on an evening sea at home. So we've got these metaphors here which really create a strong visual image of what it's like up in the sky looking out of the window. It's a very poetic description as well, and interesting that they're both like food analogies. Okay, and I think that gives it that sort of real sensory feel, and I think that what she's trying to show here is that kind of surprise and wonder at the awe and majesty of the world that the persona is seeing out of the window. The main speaker is also much more kind of complex, poetic in the way that their voice operates, much more simplistic. The next lot of water will be the med. Again, kind of knowledgeable voice has obviously taken this flight before, and there's nothing poetic in it because there's no real appreciation of what they're seeing, because for them this is kind of humdrum day-to-day experience. It's nothing out of the ordinary. Again, the italics come in. You don't need an overcoat, but it's the sort of place where you need a pullover. Know what I mean? Okay, so the fact that we've got this sort of tag question here shows us that it's a much more kind of colloquial and informal voice, because they're just like having a normal conversation. This is nothing particularly special. Where there's kind of awe and beauty, it then shifts again towards the end of the poem to something much more fearful. Okay, and look at this declarative that's end stopped. We've come too high for history. Okay, so somehow like in this other worldly space where the past doesn't exist anymore. Where we are now deals only with tomorrow. So you have to remember that this is written in the 1970s when commercial air travel is really happening for the first time. And so this feels very futuristic for the speaker. Confounds the forecasters, dismisses clocks. Now this idea of dismissing the clock, I think sort of gives us this idea of kind of being suspended away from the real world at this kind of ethereal moment in time, just alone with the weather systems. And I think this stanza here is trying to really show you the otherworldly experience of flying for the first time. I'm just going to move the poem down a little bit again. Okay, and this is the last time we get the speaker in italics. So, my last trip was Beijing. Know where that is? Beijing. Peking, you'd say. 3 weeks there I was. Peking is wrong. If you've been there, you call it Beijing, like me. See, this is why I think the voice seems particularly arrogant or dismissive, okay? So there's this idea that people who've travelled extensively and who are taking this experience of flying for the first time are definitely treated as kind of slightly scathingly by the poet for, I suppose, not appreciating the experience. So these questions, know where that is, and look at the short minor sentence that follows, Beijing, followed by the short sentence, Peking, you'd say. I mean, that's what gives it quite a dismissive, arrogant tone, okay? And then this bit at the end, this imperative, go on, say it, definitely feels aggressive, okay? I'd go as far to say that this speaker at the end here is treated with some contempt by the writer, and in that sense you could compare it to Postcard from a Travel Snob. This is the trickiest image of the poem that we end with here, okay? Mackerel wigs dispense the justice of air. At this height, nothing lives. Too cold, too near the sun. Okay, so we talked about these mackerel wigs and how we've got this image of like a mackerel sky, okay? But that sort of those clouds then are dispensing the justice of air, okay? So that's sort of suggesting the clouds in the sky look like a judge's wig, and nature is dispensing justice. Now that would imply, if nature's dispensing justice, that somehow the plane might be in danger, this sort of human bit of technology up in the natural world. Or it could be that the plane is like a mackerel, okay? So if you think about the way mackerel and the sort of shininess of it all, and that the technology is dispensing justice, for me, that second reading doesn't work as well. It feels to me like, because we talk about a mackerel sky, that it's the clouds, nature, that's dispensing justice. But that's something that you can weigh up in your analysis. At this height, nothing lives. So there's something really unnatural about being here. There's no living creatures, okay? And I think that's supposed to signify the danger of technology. There's a real mortal terror even that comes through here, reinforced by this minor sentence, too cold, okay, too unnatural, too near the sun. And obviously that's going to make us think of Icarus, who flies too close to the sun and burns his wings, and that really gives it a sense of danger. So whilst the persona acknowledges the beauty of kind of being in the sky and flying, there's also a fear about this technology and where it could lead.